That's all you need. All you need to be successful, not just in film, in life. All you need to do is hold on. Yeah.
Welcome to the Pantheon Parenthetical. My name is Lance Ash. At the private Christian school, it was so small, they only had 2 homerooms per grade. I started in 4th grade. My homeroom teacher's name was Mrs. Hughes, and the name of the teacher, the other 4th grade teacher's name was Miss Ford. And we would swap classrooms at some point during the day. Mrs. Hughes handled English, and I think probably history or social studies, whatever it was called. And Miss Ford handled the science math end, I believe. Anyway, the things to know about Mrs. Hughes are, number one, she explained the difference to us between mass nouns and count nouns by holding an imaginary bowl of milk in her hand and saying, you wouldn't look in there and say, there are 3 milk in there, which I thought was pretty funny. The other thing was, I remember her going on about what a shameful spectacle it was that everybody was so upset about Elvis Presley dying. Elvis was dead about a year at this point, and she thought it was just wretched to see these thousands of people just weeping their eyes out about the death of Elvis. And the third thing is, not long after the year started, she took me out in the hallway so as not to embarrass me when she asked me, I noticed you aren't writing in cursive. Did they not teach you cursive at that last school that you went to? And I said, well, yeah, they did, but I just don't like writing in cursive. I don't know what she said in reply to that, but basically I never wrote in cursive ever again in my life. And this was after all. First of all, I had so looked forward to learning to write the way grown-ups do. But it became such a heartbreaking chore. The emphasis that they placed on my penmanship, their distress, my parents, my teachers' distress over my poor penmanship, they made me feel like shit. And my mother used to make me copy out passages from books around the house, and I would be crying, and it was just, and it was all for nothing. All right. Now, at this school, every even-numbered grade would take a trip, and the trips would get, at some point during the year, the trips would get bigger and more elaborate each year until you built your way up to the senior year, which was the Europe trip. And of course, they changed that my senior year, but we'll talk about that later. Anyway, the trip, the 4th grade year, was 1 or 2 nights at this Christian indoctrination retreat up in the North Carolina mountains called the Wilds. It's very famous. You can look it up online. And the time spent there was high pressure, give your life over to Jesus stuff. And they really put the emotional screws to you. Anyway, there was this guy there. We wound up going I know I went at least twice, once in 4th grade and once later on. I might have went 3 times, I can't remember. But anyway, there's this guy that was there each time that I went. He had a busted leg, walked around with a cane, and I remember he gave this sermon in which he mentioned he was a very angry person. Got on to us on the 4th grade trip about keeping him up at night. We were too rambunctious in our rooms. But anyway, he gave this sermon one night in which he mentioned that he had had two very small children, and they had both died within a short period of time. And he said, people ask me, aren't you angry at God for taking away your children? And I say, no, I'm not, because they were never my children in the first place. They were God's to do with as he pleased. And even back then as a kid, and still a believer, I thought he was just a traitor to his own family. I thought how pathetic it was that he felt that way about the death of his kids. Anyway, I don't know how much more there is to talk about for fourth grade, but that's about it for now. So thank you very much for listening.